Hello, beautiful people. Fred here on this wonderful spring day. You may know I'm working on a couple series of videos about the book of Job and the UFO topic. I've made a couple of the Job ones and one on the UFO topic. So I plan to make the third one on Job, and that's going to be the real... we're just going to dive into the difficult time that he has and how that leads into the rest of his story. So I'll be working on that, sending that out soon. But I wanted to make a standalone video here based on a message that I heard actually from my minister on Sunday morning. And basically, let me just get to the point of it here, and then we'll flesh it out. So it's really just about how one act by Jesus, one interaction with Jesus, can set in motion an entire series of life-changing and historical events. Just one interaction with one person, and the flip side of this is the person. This person is in a community that is about as far from God as you can get, and he is this individual is like the most well, let's just say he's the most outcast, just problem-laden person in the entire community. And so just showing how, one act of Jesus can transform a life at like the lowest of the lowest levels in the most difficult communities and transform history. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to it. This is the book of Mark, chapter 5, and I'm reading, this is the Berean Standard Bible, my favorite translation if you don't know. All right, so what happened right before this is Jesus took his disciples from their land, the land of Galilee, really, disciples, where many disciples are from, across the lake. Lake of Galilee or Lake Gennesaret, I believe, multiple names for it. But they, in this lake, imagine it's shaped kind of like, I live in Illinois, it's kind of shaped like Illinois, but imagine, if this is Illinois here, right, this area of Illinois, this northwest area, imagine like a slice is taken out, so it's a little curved, so it's not flat, like straight across like Illinois is at the top. But it's very much shaped like Illinois. So they come up here from northwest shore of the Lake of Galilee, and they go across down here. And this is the Decapolis, it's called. It was where Jesus and his disciples came from. It's very Jewish. But the Decapolis is not Jewish. It was very much what you would call a pagan area. These people were not Jews. They didn't. The population did not follow the law of Moses. These people worshipped idols and Greek Roman gods, and that sort of thing. So these are not believers in the one God, and they certainly did not follow the law of Moses. So it would have been quite a shock for Jesus' disciples as they went on this trip. So here we go. Mark 5, verse 1. On the other side of the sea, they arrived in the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, he was met by a man with an unclean spirit. So a lot of you probably already know where I was going with this. This is about a man named, he's named Legion, but that's not really his name. He was possessed by these evil spirits or demons that called themselves Legion. We'll get to that. All right, he was met by a man with an unclean spirit who was coming from the tombs. This man had been living in the tombs and could no longer be restrained, even with chains. So, maybe you know somebody like this. Maybe you yourself have been like this when you were under the influence, or you know somebody under the influence, or perhaps they're suffering from mental or emotional condition, and they're just out of control. They're not in their right mind. That's this guy. Those are the symptoms we would attribute to somebody suffering, one of this a condition like that. So this man had been living in the tombs and could no longer be restrained even with chains. Though he was often bound with chains and shackles, he had broken the chains and shattered the shackles. There's almost a supernatural strength this man had. And, you know, I just want to acknowledge that there is a power to evil. I mean, otherwise there wouldn't be this perpetual evil in the world. I mean, there are evil powers that work in this world and through people and in people. You may think about your own life, things that you've struggled to overcome that you've not been able to overcome or change, okay? Maybe you can relate to feeling powerless to change. That's their powers of darkness. This man was completely subdued by the power of darkness, to the point where he was actually exercising some kind of supernatural strength. All right, so there was no one with the strength to subdue him. Night and day in the tombs, and in the mountains he kept crying out and cutting himself with stones. Well, I don't want to get too explicit, but I think we're familiar with people who do self-harm. It's very sad. And those who love them and care about them and are trying to help them could probably understand like how maybe helpless they feel at times to make a difference in that person's life. Had some interactions with that myself. That's not really the world that I've come from, but I've definitely dealt with some individuals, tried to, just God's put me in situations where I've been asked to help individuals in those kinds of situations and conditions. I hope that's not something you're struggling with, but if you are, then maybe you're the right person to help, and hopefully this will help you. When the man saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees before him. Well, now that's interesting. Now remember, Jesus is in this place. He's a Jew who worships the God who created the Jewish nation, and he's in this non-Jewish area. Gentile just means nations, so these are just other nations that are not Jewish, okay? And it's interesting, this man just runs up to Jesus voluntarily. He ran and fell on his knees before him, and he shouted in a loud voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you before God not to torture me." For Jesus had already declared, "Come out of this man, you unclean spirit." Okay, it wasn't unprompted. It's interesting how the text kind of puts it in reverse order here. Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you unclean spirit." So right away, Jesus is actually addressing the spirit, not the man. And then the man comes running up under the power of the spirit, and the spirit is talking to Jesus, begging him not to torture him. And interestingly, acknowledging who he is. Jesus, Son of the Most High God. I mean, at this point, I don't even remember if Peter or the apostles had acknowledged he's the Christ, the Son of the living God yet. But very often when we read Scripture, some of you may know this already, evil spirits and demons, they knew exactly who Jesus was. Even when everybody else was in denial or ignorant of it, they knew exactly who he was. There's a spiritual realm, guys, and there's a great awareness. I mean, don't think that in the spiritual realm there's a lack of awareness of what's going on in our lives. All right, for Jesus, so what is your name, Jesus asked. This is verse 9. "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." Now, this is interesting. My understanding is the word legion at this time, it was a reference, this could be a reference to like the Roman army. In the Roman army, a legion was basically, I believe it's 10,000 soldiers. So that's a lot. I mean, if this spirit was somehow saying that's characterizing who's in this man, wow, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. The scripture is not too explicit in breaking that all down, but my name is Legion, for we are many. So there certainly was more than one spirit. So this man was in some serious trouble. And he begged Jesus repeatedly not to send them out of that region. So first it says, "Don't torture us," and then "Don't send us out of that region." Now I wonder why. Well, I imagine if Jesus you know, I don't know how what options Jesus was looking at here, but I mean, if he sent them to some region that was populated by God-fearing people, maybe these spirits would have not really found much opportunity to affect people. Maybe they would have found a lot of, not a lot of open opportunities, or they would have found a lot of resistance. So they're in a very godless area. So that's all I can imagine. But I think we can recognize that evil wants to keep its foothold. That's kind of what I take away from this. There on the nearby hillside, a large herd of pigs was feeding. So the demons begged Jesus, "Please send us into the pigs so that we may enter them." Pretty well known. The law given to Moses says you don't eat pork, don't eat the pig, and sorry, bacon lovers, if you're thinking of converting to Judaism. So I think that's kind of interesting. Another just detail. This is a very this is a community. This is an entire geographical area and community that just does not recognize the sovereignty of God and His laws and that sort of thing. Okay, so I don't have a problem with bacon. Jesus actually declared all foods to be clean. If you read that in Scripture, anyway, He gave them permission. Verse 13. So it's interesting. These demons or evil spirits could not voluntarily go into the pigs, apparently. They needed Jesus to give them permission. That's interesting. How did they get in this man in the first place? I don't know. But He gave them permission. It just shows the sovereignty of Jesus Christ. And the unclean spirits came out and went into the pigs. And the herd of about 2,000 rushed the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the water. Kind of unexpected outcome there. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Beautiful for this man. Absolutely astounding. I mean, this man was not only living in a culture that was completely godless, he was very likely suffering more than anybody in this entire community. Suffering the effects of, harm and evil, or just the harm that evil can do. And here he is. It says he's sitting clothed and in his right mind. What a beautiful picture. I can only imagine what this man kind of woke up to after being freed from this possession. Who knows if he was even self-aware during that possession. It doesn't go into that. But the reaction of the people is really interesting. They were afraid. Now keep that in mind. This man's community, when they saw what happened to him, they weren't like, "Oh, he's better. This is incredible. Wow, what a miracle." They're like they were afraid. Maybe they just never saw or heard of miracles before, or the one God who did miracles through Israel and such. All right, verse 16. Those who had seen it described what had happened to the demon-possessed man and also to the pigs, and the people began to beg Jesus to leave their region. Well, I'm very... been a Christian a long time, so it's kind of little. I mean, it's hard, but it's not hard. It's hard to kind of like put myself in these guys' mindset. Like, wow, this is Jesus, who has the power to free you from evil, and you're like asking him to leave. Like, think of all the good he could do for your community. But on the other hand, there was a time before I was a Christian. I became a Christian at 22, and there was a time where I might have been really weirded out about this and confused and like, what's going on? And I don't understand what happened to this guy. So I could kind of imagine it. Now, Jesus is like, "Oh, you want me to leave? Okay." Verse 18, as he was getting into the boat. Wow, isn't that wild? Little tip here. If you ask God to leave you alone, If you ask him to go away, be careful. He might just do that. And I encourage you to not do that, to seek God, to invite God, to call out to God and really ask him to be in your life and to help you. So, all right, as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by the demons begged to go with Jesus. Now, here's an interesting turning point. But Jesus would not allow him. Go home to your own people, he said, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you. Now, what does that mean? Go home to your own people. Is he saying go back to your mom and dad and your brothers and sisters? Your own people. Well, keep in mind, this man was a Gentile, a non-Jew, and Jesus' disciples were Jewish. So here's a non-Jew saying, I want to follow you, a Jew. And so when Jesus says go to your own people, the way I read that is go to your race of people, your Gentile people, not the Jewish people. You're not Jewish. Now, does that sound a little racist or something? No, I don't believe so, because we're going to get to why this is so significant. All right, so he's telling him, go tell your own people, the people of the Decapolis, the Gentiles, how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you. Okay, so the man went away and began to proclaim throughout the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. So, the Decapolis. Well, I'm no geography expert or historian here, but Decapolis was basically 10 cities. It was just a reference to these 10 cities. And so I can't tell you the population of those cities, but maybe you want to do your own research. But basically, this guy went on a little tour telling people how his life was changed. He went from like the most afflicted man in the whole area, you know. I think of those newspaper articles. Local man, you know, whatever. Has an accident, flies through a shop window, and he's uninjured. You know, it says local man, right? That's what the headline says, local man. So that's kind of how I imagine it went with him. You know, local man, freed from evil spirits and, you know, found dressed and in his right mind. Okay? But he's the one telling the story. All right, so guys, let's jump ahead here, because this is where it gets really, really interesting. Okay, so first of all, here we go. Jesus goes into this territory, non-Jewish area, heals a non-Jew, basically goes to this neighborhood. Okay, think of it like this neighborhood, like the not your neighborhood. And he finds like the most afflicted guy in the neighborhood. Like, hey, like who in this area is having who's got the worst life? Let me go help that guy. And changes his life. All right. So we already talked about how he casts out these spirits. And oh, by the way, the people are pretty upset. Why? Because they're upset because of all the pigs. All these pigs died. 2,000 pigs, right? So I have a buddy who grew up in cattle country in Washington, and he was telling me a story about how much his dad sold his own kind of, you know, when he was growing up, they had some pigs and such, and his dad sold one, and how much he sold it for, and we kind of did the math. So I think we estimated, what was it? I think two-thirds of $1,000,000 is what we estimated all these pigs would have been worth, to adjust for inflation, based on my buddy's dad selling pigs. Now maybe these were worth more, who knows? But let's say at least two-thirds of $1,000,000 worth of pork right here. Yeah, they took an economic hit, but interestingly, they were more concerned. It just shows what this community valued. This godless community valued. They valued, they didn't value this man man's life radically being transformed. And, you know, I can see it. I mean, I look at the world, I'm like, people, yeah, there's a lot of concern about the stock market and gas prices and stuff. And it's like, if you hear a story about an individual, you're like, okay, but what about gas prices? People get all wrapped around the axle, no pun intended, about, you know, money. And yeah, money matters. It hurts if we're struggling, for sure. I deal with people all the time who are struggling with their financial situation, who need food and money and medical care and stuff like that. I'm talking to these people all the time, so I get it. And, you know, I got my own struggles. So, all right, so check this out. This man, now, when he sent him out, this man was not an apostle. There are only 12 apostles. He wasn't an evangelist, you know, like an official title. He wasn't a minister, a preacher. He was a man who had a testimony. This is a man who's just telling people what God did for him. And I don't know about you, but I can for sure tell people what God's done for me. And I hope that you have your own stories. I was just talking with a young man yesterday over coffee, 24-year-old young man, and he was telling me just things God had done for him, saved him when he was 6 or 7 and 10 years old and 20 years old and just stuff like that. And it's just really inspiring hearing that. And he's just beginning his journey of faith, I would say, like to really know Jesus. But he's already got stories he can tell. And I wonder if you have some stories. I'm sure you do. So here's this guy, though. So we know he's going out and telling this story to the Decapolis. All right. Now, this is interesting. Just a couple chapters later, Mark 7. I'm going to jump here. Mark 7, verse 31. Near the end of that chapter, it says, Jesus left the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. So Jesus had gone elsewhere after this. You know, they're like, hey, can you please leave, Jesus? you destroyed our pig business here. So he leaves. He goes elsewhere. But then he comes back. So not sure exactly how long. Maybe some months later he comes back to the Decapolis. Now, some people brought him this deaf man. He healed him. And then the next thing we see in Mark 8, verse 1. In those days, the crowd once again became very large, and they had nothing to eat. Jesus called the disciples to him and said, I have compassion for this crowd, because they've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Well, that's interesting. So, Jesus, the last we hear, he's in the Decapolis area. And then there's this large crowd. Now, if we fast forward, I'll jump to verse 9. About 4,000 men were present. So if this is a group of men, women, and children, we got 4,000 men plus women and children, and they literally followed him for 3 days without food. I mean, that's why would a crowd of thousands of people follow Jesus for 3 days without food in the area of Decapolis? Well, the way I see it is this man, because of this man, Jesus had a reputation. And when he returned, they're like, this is the man. This is the man who freed, Joe Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Well, that's maybe a Jewish name. Who healed, Brian or whoever his name is. Demetrius. Let's go with Demetrius. This is the man who healed Demetrius freed Demetrius of all this, affliction, and healed him and brought him back to sanity. And he's in town again. People heard about it. And he actually healed this deaf guy just before this. And they start following him. And follow like day after day after day. Because, why? Because this man went and told his people everything that God did for him. All right. So, If you're familiar with the Acts of the Apostles, the book of Acts in the Bible, we see Peter being the first apostle to officially bring the gospel to a Gentile household, Cornelius. But before Cornelius, there was this guy possessed by a legion of demons who told his community, kind of plowing the ground, to use a farming analogy, right? And that's amazing. That's amazing. This one man's life, the guy who was the lowest of the lowest of the low, made such a difference in his community. Prepared thousands of people to encounter Jesus. All right, so final thought here. It's going to jump forward a few decades here. Jesus died, I believe it's estimated around, early, first century, okay? We don't know the exact year. Some people think they know the year, but anyway, I'm not going to get into that. So some decades later, around AD 70, so 70, almost 2,000 years ago, famously, historically, it's recorded that Jerusalem was attacked by Rome, and the temple was destroyed. And so what happened was there's some history that explains what happened to the Christians who lived in Jerusalem at that time. It says that the early Jewish Christian church, meaning those who were in Jerusalem, so mainly Jewish Christians. There were other Christians outside of Jerusalem, but the Christians living in Jerusalem, they fled to a city called Pella. Well, where's Pella? Pella is in one of the cities of the Decapolis. They fled there for safety. And archaeology confirms this. There were like tons of Byzantine churches, Byzantine meaning Rome after the fall of Rome, that were built over like pagan ruins. So there was like this, very rich Christian history in that area. And interesting, they fled to Pella, a Decapolis city. So not only did the man prepare his community to meet Jesus when he returned, it became a safe haven for Christians when Jerusalem was destroyed some decades later. So, I don't know how you see your life. If you're struggling, if you're succeeding, how is your walk with God? How is your faith? Do you have a relationship with God? What do you think about Jesus? If you're watching this and you know me, you're probably a Christian, but maybe you're not. How do you see yourself, in your community, in your church community or your family community or your other community, whatever you consider your community? If you think that you're the low of the low of the low, just know one encounter with Jesus can propel your life to transform, well, in this guy's case, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. It can prepare, it can create a safe space. That's a phrase like people like to use today, but a truly safe space, spiritually and physically, for maybe people in the future. Do you believe that? Do you believe God can use your life, one life, even out of one encounter with Jesus? That's what I read here. So I believe that for my life, for my relationship with Jesus. I hope you do too. Hope you're encouraged.